Well, welcome to the Tailscale YouTube channel today, everybody. This is a different type of episode today. We're going to do a fireside chat with Avery Pennarun, who's the Chief Executive Officer of Tailscale, and also David Carney, who is the, checks notes, Chief Strategy Officer of Tailscale. Welcome, chaps. How are you?
Pretty good. Yeah, doing really well. Happy to be here.
Obviously, this week we're talking about the big elephant in the room, the Series C funding round that happened. Well, I guess as this airs, it will be last week, but for us, it's this week. Big opportunity in front of us as a networking company to kind of reshape the future of the internet and connectivity, and just trying to figure out how to make the internet not suck as much. Is that right, Avery?
That is a pretty good one-line summary.
So let's talk a little bit about the history of Tailscale. Obviously, you were both around for its founding in 2019 and all the various funding rounds along the way. Do you want to talk us a little bit through that journey?
Sure. Yeah, we started Tailscale around March 2019. Like I say, me and the two Davids, me and Dave Carney and David Crawshaw. Our first funding round was more or less kind of by accident in December 2019. They say if you go to Silicon Valley and you talk to your investors and you ask for money, you get advice. If you ask for advice, you get money. We went around asking for advice, not because we wanted money, but because we wanted advice. We got a lot of advice actually, but also we started getting people saying like, "Hey, I think you're ready. You should just take some investment right now." And we're like, "Oh, really?" And we actually debated at the time whether this was like a project that we even wanted to be venture backed. We were thinking like, hey, maybe wouldn't it be better to have a bootstrap business? Uh, Carney just got out of a business before that was bootstrapped and pretty successful up here in Canada, and he's like he knows for sure that it can be done. But nevertheless, we sort of got talked into the fact that the opportunity was really huge, probably huger than we had realized. And the investor that talked us into that was HeavyBit. And that's how they became our Series seed lead investor, because they understood our business model better than we did, especially at the time, and could explain it to us instead of the other way around. And that sort of started a long-term trend of, in fact, investors pitching us rather than us pitching them in the process of raising money. So next funding round was less than a year later, was our Series A with Excel. The notable story there is that HeavyBit, which is they consider themselves an accelerator, but sort of an accelerator from the like seed to A round instead of the zero to seed round. They give you advice on how to raise your future funding rounds. And the first thing they said is, Avery, do not, under any circumstances, ever raise another funding round like you did the last time, because that was a disaster. You should actually run it with intention, and don't start a funding round by accident. And here's what you should do. Never, ever meet investors for more than 30 minutes, and never meet with them in their office or in your office. And you should always have coffee. Other than that, don't talk to investors, period. And I'm like, that sounds great. And so every investor that had been emailing me for the next 9 or 10 months, I just said, sorry, I'm too busy. Talk to you next time. We're trying to raise money. Eventually, I started getting emails forwarded from the people at HeavyBit saying like, Avery, this investor they're actually pretty good and they really, really want to talk to you. Do you want to talk to them? I'm like, no, you said no, I don't want to raise money right now. No. And they're like, okay, I respect that. One of them, at one point, an investor contacted HeavyBit and they said, please pass this on to Avery. Name your price, name your terms. I want in right now. And so they passed that on to me. And I said, and my response was like, okay, well, these people just sound desperate. I don't want to take investment from somebody that desperate. And so we left that on the table. But then, that the word about that and the fact that we didn't want the money sort of got out. And two more investors did the same thing. And at that point, the HeavyBit people were like, okay, Avery, I want to update our advice to you. There is such a thing as a global maximum. You have reached it. If you're planning to ever raise a Series A ever, you might as well do it now. And so I took that advice. I decided to have conversations with these three people who had sent the sort of name your price offers. And actually Excel, who's the people we ended up taking money from in the end, were actually number 4. They came in a little bit late in that process after they heard that I had finally started talking to people. And we interviewed these investors. And, in the world of name your price, name your terms, we had to optimize for some other better criteria. And the better criteria we picked is I need somebody who, I can work with really well and who will give me really good advice. And that's what we got from Excel. Series B was a little bit different. That was right before the big venture capital crash of 2022. We raised it at the height of the height. And that was more advice from HeavyBit, actually. They said, Avery, if you're planning to raise money anytime in the next 2 years, you should raise it right now. Hint, hint, because things are not going to be the same in a few months. And that turned out to be excellent advice. We raised our Series B Pretty high valuation for the time at the height of the market. And that led us to 3 years later, we raised our Series C, no longer at the height of the market. And it's very exciting to be not at the height of the market, but the valuation of Tailscale has gone up significantly. We've really grown into that valuation from our Series B and beyond it. But yeah, each one of those phases, I would say, like a lot of it came down to like pull from the like venture capital market. It's like, hey, we really want to give you money right now. Uh, we will give you excellent terms because Tailscale is a great company. And that's kind of how I like to do it.
So I'll be honest with you, I don't know much about VCs and funding except for what's in Silicon Valley, that the TV show. Really, how close to reality is that?
And that show is actually really creepy. I couldn't make it to the end of that show. I only got to like season 3 or so. Because every single episode is like, oh my God, I know that person. Oh, I know that person too. Oh, well, that's a
Too
conglomerate of
close to
3 different
home.
people I know. But
Yeah.
yeah,
And I
yeah.
guess what's funny is our slogan for a while was "We're building the new internet" as
I
well.
know. So I mean, yes, it is. It's funny because it's from the show, but it started off as a joke. But then, like half of the people had seen the show and thought it was funny, or that I was dumb and didn't know the joke, or the other half of people had not seen the show and thought it was the best thing ever. And now I'm like so committed to the bit that we have to build the new internet. We don't have a choice.
So, Carney, can you talk to me a little bit about some of the highlights that you've had along the way? I'm sure you've been involved in some of the funding discussions and stuff like that.
Yes, a lot of the funding discussions. Well, this one in particular, I was involved in some of the discussions, but certainly not a lot of the legwork. We've A lot's changed since our Series B, and so starting, I guess, with the seed and the A, and then leading into the B. The way it generally worked was like Avery was the opener, and that he would go out and have a lot of these sort of long conversations and coffee chats and whatnot with all the VCs. And then once we actually signed the term sheet and sort of into the diligence, became effectively the de facto closer. And that I was the one sort of wrangling all of the, I guess, the paperwork and working with the angels and working with the venture capitalists and working with the lawyers and getting stuff all tied up nicely. And every round got progressively crazier, but at the same time, I guess the lawyers we were using and the team we were using, like, it just scaled with us. It made it sort of very easy. And thankfully, like, we always worked with really good investors along the way, who also just had good teams on their side. And so, in my experience, having done a few of the rounds, and then sort of contrasting that with some other companies, like we had it really easy. But the reason we had it easy is because we had a really compelling product that came out at the right time and a great team, and so people were just eager to invest. And so we've been very, very fortunate in that regard. Um, this latest round, the C, we go to the point where we have like a really solid team. We have like a VP finance, a director of legal. We recently brought in an SVP of operations, and they've all got their reports underneath them. It's a fantastic team in general. And so I was saying to Avery just a few weeks ago, as we were in the midst of like wrapping up a lot of this paperwork, I'm like, I feel like I'm sort of out of touch with a lot of these things because I really haven't had to do much. Like, sure, I read all the docs, I had a global understanding at a high level of what was going on. But I almost felt like something was missing because I just wasn't in the thick of it. But that was sort of testament to the fact that yes, the company is sort of at the scale now where large parts of it can operate independently, um, which is, to be honest, pretty thrilling.
There is something I think that Avery, I think you said at my very first sort of all hands team meeting of every time the company doubles in size, you end up with a new company.
Yes. I mean, there's a series of research papers written by someone named Dunbar and one or two of his coworkers. So you might have heard of Dunbar's number. People normally put this around 150 to 180 people. Like past that number, there's a lot of different ways to phrase it. My favorite way of phrasing it is this is when a company starts needing badges that you have to wear when you're in the office because it's no longer possible to tell by looking at somebody whether they work here or not. Up to about 150 people, you can have at least a facial memory. You know that, like, okay, I've seen this person before. They probably work here, right? Or I've seen them in a meeting before. And beyond that number, it just becomes impossible for the average person. I personally am below average, so I'm probably not at 150. I'm probably at like 100 or so maximum. But anyway, it turns out if you actually go back and read the papers, there's a series of numbers that I call Dunbar's numbers. And it's basically every multiple of about 2 to 5 times human societies change how they interact, right? All the way down to like one person is obviously a special case. 3 to 5 people is a family. 15 people is like an extended family. Get beyond, another multiple is a neighborhood, and you have villages, and you have towns, and you have cities, and you have metropolises or metropolis. I'm not sure. Anyway, each of those has to be managed in a different way, right? And that's exactly the same in a company. Like when you're a company of 10 people, you don't really need managers, right? You don't need a coherent strategy because everybody is just kind of, as long as you talk to each other at all, you're kind of just naturally aligned that you're going in roughly the same direction. When you're a company of 150 people, which we are now, it's a different world. Like people will naturally wander off in different directions unless you spend a lot of time making sure everybody knows which direction we're all supposed to be going in.
Yeah, I've certainly seen that evolution firsthand. I mean, I've been around, I guess, for 18 months or so now. It's been really fun to watch the growth of the company and you guys too. So, what does this $160 million of funding mean for the future of Tailscale?
So I think most important thing people need to realize about funding, there's a few important things. One of them, first of all, uh, equity financing is not the same as debt financing, right? You don't pay back the money you raised in equity. There's no loan, there's no interest rate, nothing like that. Ultimately, it's obviously not what investors are hoping for. But if that money disappears, you're not on the hook for it, right? You're there to spend it. They bought shares in exchange for this money. Um, Secondly, you raise money when there's a return on investment to be had. So my personal philosophy is you should never raise money when you have to raise money. The best time to raise money is when you don't need the money. I learned this in my brief stint working in the banking world, and it's absolutely true. It is easiest to raise money when you don't need it. So when we raised our Series C, we still had more than half of the money left from the Series B we raised 3 years ago. So this isn't about like, oh, we're about to run out of money, we needed more money, or like, oh, we're getting desperate, we're going to have to start doing more advertising in order to make enough money to not go to business, right? It's not like that. Tailscale is going really well. We have a path to profitability that we could get on to if we want to. But we also have lots of opportunities that are showing up now because Tailscale, the product, has reached this level of maturity that there's lots and lots and lots of different places where it could be used with just a little bit of improvement here and there. And so there's a whole bunch of things we can do. Each of those things we can do has like dollar signs attached to the reward, like the revenue you can get for it. And the cost of doing it is less than that revenue. But that means you've got like 100 different projects to choose from, all with positive ROI. If you do that and you don't have enough money, you have to choose some subset of those projects, and your company grows slower than it theoretically could have. So, the best situation for a venture backed company is you raise a bunch of money that allows you to pursue more things at the same time that you already know are going to be successful. And that's what the definition of a growth stage company is. It's the difference between an early stage startup and a growth stage company. Is at a growth stage company, you don't have to use your imagination to know what the good ideas are going to be. You already have them there. Your customers are demanding these things and you're choosing between your options. And we have so many options that it would be a waste to not pursue more of them at the same time.
So, what do you say to those people who have strong, visceral negative reactions to VC funding and the fact that we are going to enshitify and all the rest of it?
So, first of all, I will say I also do. So I'm 100% like coming from that camp, right? I've seen plenty of enshittification in my life. I love that new word. I think it was coined by Cory Doctorow, and it really just like it's amazing how when you apply like you create a word for something, that something suddenly has meaning where people like didn't really realize that was a thing before. And now like once this word exists, everybody looks and they've seen it everywhere, and everything in the whole computer industry enshittifies. It's really disappointing how bad things get, right? But when I say everything, that's an exaggeration. The truth is, there is a bunch of stuff out there that actually doesn't get worse over time, right? I would say, like many Apple products, maybe not all Apple products, but many Apple products generally get better over time instead of worse. They don't become like these like machines for sucking up your private information. They don't become filled with bugs. They don't become things that like just like pop up giant pop up saying, "Hey, like Windows 10 is obsolete. You should really install Windows 11." Oops, Windows 11 doesn't work on your computer, but I'm still going to display the giant pop up, right? Like that. None of that stuff has to happen. It happens because people make a choice to do that, and a lot of the time when they're making that choice, it's the wrong choice, right? You will see lots of companies out there that the last few things they do before they finally go to business is start enshittifying. That is a sign that the enshittification, as much as I think like the original essay by Dr. Rowe about it, makes it sound like the best way to like capture the audience, then make all the money from the audience is to enshittify. That's not really true. Most of the time when products enshittify, it's their like desperation. If it's like, oh crap, we are not going to make it unless we extract more money per customer from the existing customer base because there's no way we can get enough customers faster to make it up. Or we're like losing money on every customer. And the idea of we're going to make that up in volume no longer applies because the joke is run out, right? When your company is actually being successful, when you have high margins, when you have a path to profitability, there is no reason that you have to enshittify. And in fact, with Tailscale, our success depends on how much everybody loves Tailscale. That is the entire way we operate, right? All of our customers that pay us arrived because somebody used Tailscale at home. They brought it to work, and then people at work loved it, right? And they told all their friends. And so this word of mouth factor is fundamentally important to our business model, right? That's the thing that makes us successful. Everything we do to make the product less enjoyable is going to reduce that word of mouth factor and make us less successful. And it's really important that we designed our company and our product in that way, right? We have super high margins, so we can afford to give away a lot of Tailscale without losing money. And people really love Tailscale, and we've integrated that into the business model so that we have a strong incentive to make people love Tailscale more.
Yeah, to be honest with you, I found Tailscale through trying to install it on my Synology at home.
Mm.
And then obviously I enjoyed it so much I got a job here. And I think just the business model of people enjoying it at home in that kind of free tier model. I mean, Carney, you and I were just talking last week about building a home lab for you. That model it's incredibly powerful, no?
Uh, Definitely. I mean, we started by building Tailscale for ourselves, and I'm like every time we release a new feature, like there's some of them now on sort of that are more enterprise oriented, where I'm like, well, I could never use that. I can see why people need it. But every time we talk about what should be in which plan and like where should this new feature go, there's always a huge amount of, I guess, internal debate of just like, well, can we give this away for free? Like, is this even relevant to really the fundamental mission of the business, which is to fix the internet? I dealt with, well, I've got sort of different experiences of Avery, but we're the same age. We grew up, and watched the internet sort of take shape and take hold, and we watched cloud computing come in. I dealt with the enshittification of cloud computing and SaaS for a very long time. And then by the time I left my last startup, I was really, really frustrated with SaaS and just sort of the nature of cloud computing in general. And then there's this thing called Kubernetes, which I felt was just making the world a worse place. And so there was like a lot of sort of pent up frustration. And a lot of it really came down to things like, well, if I wanted to bring up a little app to share with my friends, I have to think about security and firewall ports. I have to think about writing an authentication system. I have to think about DDoS. I have to think about all this stuff. And so much of like that initial, I guess, energy behind Tailscale, at least for me, was because I wanted to solve those problems, and that's still true to this day. So like even though that we have bigger and bigger and bigger customers, like the core mission of the business really fundamentally revolves around enabling like individuals and small teams to be like much more effective. And I, that will be true for as long as I'm here. That's for sure.
That's good to hear. And honestly, we just crossed, what is it, 10,000 paying customers just a couple of months ago. I believe that number doubled in just 10 months. And so
Yeah.
from
And
this
in the
chair at
following
least,
2 months, we went up 20% more.
well, there you go. I mean, from this chair at least, the 160 million just enables us to really turn that velocity dial to 11, just invest in all the right areas that scratches all the right itches for all the right people so that they can adopt Tailscale and kind of keep that ball rolling.
Yes. Yeah, I think one thing that people are maybe expecting is that we're going to like take this money and pour it into like huge amounts of advertising. I'm not going to promise we won't have billboards. I'm being told that actually the ROI on billboards for a company our size is positive, which I'm like, okay, convince me. Might be true. You might see a Tailscale billboard, but the majority of the money is going to go into engineering. And the engineering we're going to do, a lot of it you might not even notice. It's just going to be, again, Tailscale is a networking product. The number one thing people expect from Tailscale is that it will work and it'll work really well and I'm never going to have to think about it. And so there's like, 100 different weird edge cases that a small fraction of people run into that we're going to be able to fix. And we're just going to be able to make Tailscale more and more and more and more high quality. You can think of it as like adding more nines to the reliability factor in like weirder and weirder edge cases. And that's the core thing that we're going to be working on. Like people love Tailscale the way it is. Wouldn't it be better if it like just did what it does right now, even better? We're not likely to launch whole new product lines or anything like that. It's like the core Tailscale product has a lot of room to grow. And this money allows us to just like refine it in a sort of continuous improvement sort of way. And I realize that's unusual in the software industry, but we find ourselves in a position where like our customers really appreciate exactly that thing about us, that we continually improve the thing that we have instead of like constantly trying to guess about some new branch we can go in.
So I guess this would be a good time to segue into a bit more of a technical discussion. I've got a question for you both about what the biggest challenge was technically about getting Tailscale to where it was today. Building a VPN around WireGuard can't have been easy.
Uh, um, where to begin with that one? I mean, there's a really good story about a bet or a dare, I guess, that Avery can tell better than me. But in the very early days, uh, the idea of sort of, well, the fundamental concept of Tailscale is fundamentally it is a mesh overlay network that's built with WireGuard as being a key piece of it. There's like two other main pieces that we sort of bolted on or added over ourselves. But there is, there's some Tailscale lore where late on one week, I believe, Avery, you dared Crawshaw to go off and build a mesh network, and then Crawshaw came back on Monday saying, like, basically, I had having a eureka moment, maybe not in a bathtub, but he'd come up with it.
Yeah, and the behind that dare is the story of my previous project. I was working at Google on Google Fiber. My team was working on Wi-Fi meshes, and the thing we learned about working on Wi-Fi meshes, which is what everybody finds out who starts trying to work on a Wi-Fi mesh, is that about 99% of your effort is spent trying to make the stupid Wi-Fi chipset not crash, and the remaining 1% is spent trying to do the mesh, and that remaining 1% is just not enough time. So if you're ever wondering why like Wi-Fi mesh hardware never really quite meshes the way it's supposed to be, it's because they spend all of their time trying to make it not crash, because these chipsets are so buggy that it's insane. And so the conversation with Crawshaw was like, hey, we could make, he's like, we could make a mesh network, and I'm like, I don't think so. I spent the last 7 years trying to make mesh networks. I'm really tired. And he's like, well, but that was a Wi-Fi mesh network. What if you didn't have to do the 99%? It could spend all of your time on that 1%. I'm like, well, I guess that would be a little bit easier, but like still I don't know if I want to get into it. And that's when he ran off and like spent the weekend turning it into a mesh network. And that made a really good blog post, and sort of the rest is history after that.
I think it's really interesting if you look at the mesh VPN space as a whole. There was one called Tink for a little while. There was another one. Was it Slack built Nebula? What was it that gave you the belief that you could solve that problem where others had failed?
I think the specific problem that we set out to solve, like our very first customer was a small to medium sized bank in Canada called VersaBank. And they had a specific need to get two-factor authentication in order to access certain private things running on their network. And they called me up because I was friends with the CEO at the time. And he's like, Avery, how do I do this? How do I get two-factor authentication onto my existing apps without modifying the apps? And I'm like, well, I don't know. One way to do that would be to VPN into your server network, and the VPN has two-factor authentication, and then you sort of get two-factor authentication for free. And so he said, all right, that sounds great. How do I do that? And I said, okay, well, let me look into it. I'm sure there's a VPN out there that will work great if you leave it on all the time, not slow anything down, integrate with your Active Directory, which is the thing they were using for authentication, and do two-factor authentication. Like, obviously, this is a common problem. I will just go find you the product that does this, and then I'll go back to doing what I was doing. And I went and looked, and I couldn't find a product that worked like that. Right. In particular, the leaving it on all the time is just not something that in 2019 anybody did with VPNs. VPNs were sort of in this bucket of like, well, it sucks, but most of the time you're in the office. So if you're going to not be in the office for a few days, you can suffer a little bit and it's better than nothing. But then this was the world at the time. And this special use case where we are going to be sitting in the office and using a VPN anyway was just not covered for. So I found out about WireGuard. This is a technology that had come out a little while ago. And so we like, okay, well, I can build you a thing that ties WireGuard into your Active Directory, and Active Directory is going to do your two-factor authentication. Would that solve your problem? And then he said, yeah, sure, let's do that. So that's what we built. And that's sort of the realization we had is this is a much more generalizable problem. And sort of, a year later, the continuation of that story is everybody suddenly had to go home for COVID. All of the employees of this bank went home for COVID. They literally brought their desktop computers like out of the office and brought them home. And everything kept working because those machines were already using Tailscale to VPN into their server network. So they sort of had this like surprise benefit of it being a remote access tool, but that's not actually what we built in the first place.
Yeah. Just to add on to that story, I guess in parallel to these conversations with VersaBank, like when we started the company, we had no idea what we wanted to do. We wanted to work together, and we were talking about working on things, maybe in log processing, maybe something Kubernetes related, maybe something networking related. I recall clearly Avery saying, "Have you heard about WireGuard?" back in January 2019, and I hadn't, and I started reading about it. But we spent the first several months just interviewing a lot of companies. We like every time we spoke with one, like an individual or a team, maybe in DevOps, maybe in engineering, we would always ask, like, do you have like one or two other people we should speak to? And then we basically built just a gigantic database of all the conversations we had, the kinds of problems they had, the kinds of things they were thinking about or they didn't know how to do yet. And this I guess this project with VersaBank came up and we started implementing it on the side. And when we actually had the initial prototype working, we realized like, wait a minute, this is broadly applicable to a lot of these conversations we've had with these other companies over like these previous few months. And so we started bringing it around to them, saying like, oh, you had this kind of problem, but what if you solved it at like this lower level instead? Like, what if you introduced two-factor authentication at L3? And a lot of people were very interested in that. And that's when we realized, I think we're actually onto something. And that's when the debate about, oh, do we bootstrap it? Do we open source it? Do we go and talk to some VCs and ask for advice came up? So it was really, there was like a long road of exploration to get there, but also informed just by a lot of research and frankly, a bit of good luck.
Now, let me ask you both about the transition now that we are kind of undergoing to an identity-based network in terms of how we're talking about Tailscale in this next chapter.
Sure. So, I mean, it's identity-based networking is this new term we've debated for a long time. Like, how do you describe what Tailscale is? Just calling it a VPN doesn't really do it justice because, like, every VPN everybody's ever used is sort of like awful and despised, right? So, like, maybe VPN is not like a great way to describe your product, even though it is technically a description of what the thing does. It is a layer 3 tunnel, which is what a VPN is, but it doesn't feel like a VPN. And so identity first networking is a nice way of like emphasizing what Tailscale brings to the world. And of course, it's been like this since the first day when we built this two-factor authentication layer for WireGuard. Like WireGuard is a network, is a VPN, right? Tailscale makes it identity first because it ties your WireGuard keys into your existing corporate identity or your existing personal identity. Once you have that, it gives you this really interesting ability to, like, every time there's a service you connect to through Tailscale, that service already knows who you are because you're already logged into Tailscale. And that would be scary on the public internet where it'd be like a giant privacy violation. But it's wonderful on your internal corporate network or your internal personal network. It's like, hey, the login screen doesn't have to exist. It just knows already who I am. It knows what things I'm supposed to be allowed to do. All my packets are already encrypted, so I know for sure that I'm talking to the server that I'm supposed to be talking to. And you can write, instead of firewall rules that refer like this IP address is allowed to talk to this other IP address except under these conditions with this additional rule on top. You can just say, look, people in this user group are supposed to be allowed to talk to servers tagged like this. Make it so. And Tailscale will convert that identity-based policy description into an IP-based packet filter, an IP and encryption-based packet filter on each device automatically. And so, like, the fact that it's identity first is sort of the thing that makes it unique among networking tools.
So what's your biggest, I suppose, feature request for an identity feature? I mean, we've got TSIDP, which is like the world's smallest OIDC server that plugs into Tailscale for auth. What else is out there? What else aren't we thinking about?
Well, TSIDP is a great little story in itself. So Tailscale, to log into Tailscale, you use an OIDC provider. Google or Microsoft or Okta or several other ones are like the most common commonly known OIDC providers. You can also bring your own OIDC provider. Usually you'll set it up on your own machine. You have to host it somewhere, give yourself a username and password or whatever. What's neat is that once you have logged into Tailscale, you have a Tailscale identity. TSIDP is an OIDC provider that uses your Tailscale identity. So it's like the reverse thing of logging into Tailscale. But you can use TSIDP to then log into other stuff. And the neat thing about TSIDP is that people are concerned sometimes using Google as their identity provider across a whole bunch of SaaS applications, because what if Google kicks them out? Now they're locked out of everything and they can't recover it. I think that concern is a little bit overblown, but it is a real concern. TSIDP, the neat thing about it is your identity provider hosted on your hostname. And you run it, and all the logging happens to you. So like Google might know that you logged into your Tailscale network using Google, but then if you log into everything else using TSIDP, Google doesn't know what you logged into using TSIDP, right? Also, we don't know what you logged into using TSIDP because it's a little open source tool that you host yourself on your Tailscale network, which is end-to-end encrypted, and we can't see the traffic, right? So it's actually a neat way to bootstrap privacy on top of a system that is sort of known for not being private. There's all kinds of little things like that you can build on top of Tailscale once you have just the core fundamentals of Tailscale in place. Another tool that we have in our community projects is called GoLink. Again, it's a little thing you can host it for yourself on your Tailscale network. And it creates a host name called Go. And then you can type in your browser go/link name, and it's a link shortener that only applies to your private network. And people who have worked at Google and a few other like big or small companies have probably run into like Go link shorteners corporately, but those things were a lot harder to deploy than a Go link on your Tailscale network.
What about you, Carney? What's got you excited as the stuff that's either on the feature roadmap or your personal wish list for Tailscale?
I'm wondering how much of the roadmap I can divulge. Um, there's greater minds than me that have like laid down a bunch of ideas that I'm very excited about. I think the thing that I'm largely focused on nowadays is partnerships. Partnerships means a lot of things. The kinds that I'm particularly drawn to are like technological integrations, uh, basically letting developers and engineers and small teams like self-serve one way or the other. And we built a self-serve motion with Tailscale already. Individuals can show up, they can bring it to work, they can deploy it like one server, one device at a time. But there's an extension to that motion where, say, teams can show up and they can start building Tailscale into their own products and services, or they can start deploying Tailscale on behalf of their customers through a self-serve motion. And this is the kind of thing that I'm really excited about because, like, why should we have all the fun when it comes to sort of deploying and managing networks? Like we can build the infrastructure for it and let other companies start doing these kinds of things. And so we have some plans in the roadmap. We refer to them as, well, multi-telnet is one of them, where we start to allow companies to create like arbitrary number of tailnets sort of under their organization. And then extensions of that where you can start to allow like arbitrary membership. So you can create like arbitrary private networks with arbitrary like identity providers. So for whatever your workloads might be, it's like maybe you want to set up a random Minecraft server and invite people from your office and a few Gmail accounts, or maybe you need a corporate network that involves like a certain contractors. Maybe you need like an ephemeral network for a Kubernetes workload. These are things that we're planning on building, and I think it's just going to open up a whole world of possibilities for everybody who's already using Tailscale, and then all their customers as well. So, like, I'm extremely excited about that. But I know there's a lot of other stuff on the roadmap too that we've got to, like Avery said, there's a lot of opportunities. We did raise 160 million. Um, there's more than 160 million dollars worth of ideas that we can deploy, so we still have to pick and choose carefully.
How much money has been spent rolling out IPv6? I bet it's more than 160 million, right?
And it still doesn't work
and
properly.
IPv6 still doesn't work. It's still not rolled out. It's obsolete before we finish the rollout, right? So like Tailscale, we're actually there. Like, look, IPv6 failed to do its job of replacing IPv4 on the internet and solving the problems of IPv4. Like, and we've been stuck on this for 30 years now. Like, somebody's got to fix it. And Tailscale is like, ultimately, it started out as a joke. It's really not a joke anymore. Like, we're going to do it. We're going to replace the internet with this better thing. And we're not going to own the whole thing by the time it's all said and done, right? But it's going to look a lot like Tailscale. And to make that happen does does cost some money to build all the stuff. The nice thing is there's a lot of customers who want to pay for us or pay for that along the way, right? So I think we can be a profitable company that makes the internet a better place.
All right. Well, I think we're pretty much out of time for today. Thank you both, gents, for joining me. I've got one final question for each of you, which is just a little fun one. That if you weren't running Tailscale, what alternate universe would you be in? What would you be doing?
I know what Avery would be doing. At least I have an idea. I don't know what I would be doing. But we could maybe Avery, you could
All
tell
right,
me what I
well,
should be doing, and I could tell you what I think you'd be doing.
I think Carney would be the new Prime Minister of Canada.
Yeah, I'll just sub in.
Yeah, and people can barely tell you apart, right? You got the face,
Yeah.
right? You've got the charisma, and just like show up as like, hey,
Yeah,
we could be your partner.
yeah. If I shave the
Canada,
beard,
best
I'm a
partnership
twin.
opportunity ever.
Here was me
Yeah,
expecting
exactly.
one of you to say I'd open a coffee shop or something. Nope, going to run for office.
Yeah. It's funny though. I sort of a side note. A good friend of mine. I ran into her years ago. And she had recently started seeing this person who was in finance. They're now married and they've got plenty of children. And he didn't even introduce himself by name. The first thing he said to me was like, she's like, "Oh, this is Carney," and he's like, "Any relation?" Because yeah, Mark Carney was like the governor of the Bank of Canada at the time. Yeah, I think for Avery, I think he would be an author of some form. Like, and we talked about this even earlier today. Like, Avery's always been a great writer. You can check out his blog if you haven't. But I
Agree
don't know
with
if
that.
it. Yeah, I think some combination of technical writing analysis, and I don't know how much you are into fiction, Avery, but I think
I have written some short story fiction, but I've never attempted to distribute that too publicly because it's I don't know. I know some of it's good, in my opinion. But yeah, and arguably some of the press releases I write are at least 50% fiction.
Well, hey, Tailscale was fiction 5 years ago, and here we are.
Exactly. What's the best way to predict the future is to invent it, I think somebody said.
Accurate. Well, thank you both for joining me. And until next time, I've been Alex from Tailscale.